Hello and welcome. My name is Herminder Ray, and I will be your host for this TLC session. We are excited that you have joined us today for Bring Your Crayons to the Class, Humor in Music in the Online Classroom. Please welcome Dr. Yolanda Harper.
Thank you, Herminder. Well, hello, welcome everyone. I'm so glad you're here. We're going to talk today about using humor and music in the online classroom. Hello, welcome. My name is Yolanda Harper, Associate Professor in the College of Health, Human Services, and Sciences, and we'll talk today about music and humor in the online classroom. Okay, so our first reflection question is, which of the three introductions is your welcome announcement most alike? So if you take a moment and reflect on it, you don't have to share your answer to this one in the chat, but I do want to hear from you more later on. Okay, so you may have noticed in the title that crayons was listed as and presented as an acronym. And so some of you may have come here wondering what C.R.A.Y.O.N.S stands for. Well, notice it says, what color are your crayons? So I'm going to share some tips and some things that I've read about and done in my classes, but it really is about what you bring to the class. So I hope within the next 20 or 30 minutes, I'd like you to reflect upon the acronym and how you would define crayons for you and based on your unique strengths and areas of expertise. And I'll present a couple of options just to kind of stimulate thought. But again, please share any ideas that you come up with for what your crayons would be for your online classes. And of course, if you think of additional ideas later, or you're watching this after we've recorded it, do please email me. Okay, so here's our session outline presented in a couple of different ways. Both are accurate and both demonstrate different ways of presenting information that we're going to cover today. So let's start with the why. Why do we integrate humor and music in our classes? Basically, like we do anything in our classes, to improve student learning. And we're fortunate to have literally decades and decades of research documenting the usefulness of humor in teaching in university settings. And we have almost 2 decades of research documenting and making the case for the benefits of humor in our online classes as well. And the research, these are kind of the top themes that continue to pop up as you review the literature. Everything from creating a supportive learning environment, increasing interest, building relationships, and of course, reducing student stress and anxiety. Because if we can help reduce their stress and anxiety, then they're primed better to learn. So if you would share in the chat, what do you use? What are the vehicles that you use in your classes to present humor and music to students? Now, I have at one point in time or another used everything on this particular list, but actually most frequently I use the top 4. And how? Again, if you share in this chat how you use music and or humor in your classes. Again, we're going to basically spend the rest of this session talking about the hows. Okay, so visual humor is probably the most frequently utilized way of presenting humor in the classroom. And so here's an example of one of my announcements encouraging students to use the services in the Writing Center and Grammarly. And I actually have a goal of presenting some type of announcement related to the Writing Center, a minimum of 3 times in every course. So some announcements, are more text-based, and others like this, have a little something in there to make students smile, hopefully. In this particular article, I do highly recommend it. And the first author in this article, Mark, he actually uses the Meet Your Instructor page to first introduce some humor in his class, and he does so by adding extended beards on his picture of himself and his entire family. Now, me, I tend to use more my pictures tend not to be this humorous, but certainly if you do something like this in your class to introduce yourself to your students, obviously you're among good company. The second author in the same article talks about how he uses humor to reinforce specific course content. And he has a segment in each of his lecture modules. It's somewhat like a blog within the instructor guidance that he calls Frank's Rants. And in his rant, he goes off onto some tangent related to a topic that they're covering in a way that reinforces accurate information and accurate knowledge about the topic. Welcome to Research Methods. This class will be an experiment. Half of you will get real information, while the other half will get a placebo. So here's an example of using humor to preview specific course content. Now, most students, when they first enter a research methods class, don't know the concept of a control group versus an experimental group, but they probably have heard the word placebo and have an idea of what that is. So linking placebo with control group helps them get ready to learn this particular set of concepts. And of course, if you look online and in books, you can find a large array of different comics and images to help reinforce specific course content. And humor can be used to lighten the mood when introducing new content. And I also like this one because it helps to reinforce a specific course expectation. Okay. And of course, there are a wealth of videos online. I always try to use engaging speakers in my courses, in the guidance, and as well as in my discussion responses to students. And these are just a couple of examples. I actually am going to give you a link to the handout at the end that has hyperlinks to all of these videos, so you'll have access to those later. But these are a couple of videos that, again, the speakers are engaging, and they also use humor in the course of what they're presenting. Here's another example. When we get to the segment in my cultural awareness in the human services class, where we're talking about biases related to attractiveness and ability or disability. This is a particular video that I've gotten a lot of positive feedback from students. And so this particular woman, Ms. Velasquez, she is a very motivational speaker, and she talks a lot about how her identity is not tied up in, it's not based on her looks or her ability or disability, and she uses humor in it. And here's an example of one student's response to this particular video. So she says she loves the humor. She actually includes in her post way more than I asked her to talk about, but I did ask her to answer Lissy's question. In her video, Lissy asked the question of what defines you. And so my student also shared her answer to the question. And then I come back with something to acknowledge that I've read her response and add just a little more energy and more smiles to the course and to our interaction. Now, there are times when we have students that are hilarious or they share humorous anecdotes. And so I keep several emojis and GIFs to use in my reply to them when I acknowledge how they've used humor in the discussion board in an appropriate way. Students really do sometimes share some funny anecdotes. In one of my classes, we talk about assimilation and accommodation from the standpoint of learning, and I asked students to join in and share examples of assimilation and accommodation, either from some aspect of the real world, so it could be personal, something they observed, but just to share an example. And so in one class, I had a student share how her son, when he learned to say dada, in response to his dad, he generalized that response, assimilation, and basically referred to every adult male that they encountered as dada, much to my students' chagrin and to the embarrassment of a lot of random guys in Walmart and grocery stores. And so reading what my student wrote made me chuckle. So I told her it made me chuckle, and I added an animated GIF. Okay. And then I have some animations that are very personalized for students and some emojis. I had one student who went on about how she's a big football fan and comes from a long generation of football fans. And so I found some emojis just for her, and when appropriate in the discussion, then I would use the football emojis for her. I had another student who had a great passion for cats and shared how she lived with a very large number of cats. So when ultimately you knew it was going to happen, she was going to share some funny anecdote related to cats and related that she could tie into whatever the subject we were talking about that particular week. And when she did, I was ready. I found a LOL for her with cats. Another student talked about how he loved Calvin and Hobbes. So I found an animated GIF with Calvin and Hobbes to share with him at one point in the course. And then I use a lot of badges and emojis. And then when students really do like an amazing work, then I often use highly animated emojis like these. So now we're going to change gears and talk about using music basically for cognitive and effective engagement for our students. And if you look at the research on music in the classroom, it's very similar in terms of the benefits to what you see in humor, except music has the additional benefit of being able to evoke a much larger array of emotions. And there are a lot of different versions of soundtracks to engage students. Here's one that I like. I'll have students create and share a playlist of 6 songs as part of their introduction, so 2 representing their past, their present, and their future, and then have students ask questions of one another in order to learn more about why the certain songs were selected. Another one we saw in the previous slide was What Makes You Rock, so students share songs that are personally motivating for them. And I recommend this article by Dunlap and Lowenthal because they present a large number of very specific examples of ways to use music effectively in online courses with enough detail where we can just read them and walk away and implement what we like in our courses. Now, I was actually surprised when I read this article because they really use a lot of music in their classes. They pretty much use music like a music producer might use in a movie. A lot of background music to set the tone and signal transitions to emphasize points. Way more than I had ever thought about using, honestly. But now I've got some new ideas that I'm thinking about additional ways that I can use music. Another one idea that I do like is having students collect songs that actually reinforce specific concepts that we're covering in our courses. So particularly if I'm teaching a course that has a lot of names and dates, and a lot of theorists perhaps that we're covering, having students identify a song or even write a verse or a few lyrics to help them remember a particular theorist can be very beneficial. And then we have another professor who actually creates original songs to help students understand difficult material. And kind of the 2 major things to keep in mind, you think pretty commonsensical, right? Avoid offensive and explicit language because we don't want to offend anybody. And then whatever musical selections we select should in some way contribute to relaxation, alertness, and openness because these are the cognitive and emotional states that help prime the brain to be receptive to learning. I'm going to present just a little of my introduction for the sake of time. We won't go through all of it, but again, I have this introduction in which I have some music and I share some about myself for students, give them my soundtrack, some of the books I like for fun, a few favorite quotes, and some inspirational things from my students. Just to let them know they're welcome in a different kind of way. And here's just one kind of typical response that I received. Not every student is going to watch a video that you record, as an introduction, but actually quite a few do. And I do get quite a lot of feedback on it. So this particular video, the music, again, helped bring back a positive memory for him. Here's another announcement that I created. I've come to find that students make pretty common mistakes when it comes to their APA format. So I put together a little video that I posted an announcement. Occasionally I'll link it as grading feedback. Not all the time, but sometimes as a student continues to make the same errors in their format despite me giving them the same written feedback in the grade book on it for a couple of weeks, I might attach the video. And this actually presents a review of APA format in a little game form using a game. So if any of you were Sesame Street kids, like I was and am to some extent, then you may remember the game. One of these things is not like the others. So I start.
Hello and welcome to the APA Format Challenge.
So I start with a little background information that I'm chatting with them about.
Okay, everybody ready? Now take a look there. See that stuff there? Okay, now three of these things belong together. Three of these things are kind of the same, but one of these things just doesn't belong here. And now it's time to play our game. It's time to play our game.
So I have Kermit give them the rules, and then
Which one is different? Do you know? Can you tell which thing is not like the other? I'll tell you if it is so.
So then I have Big Bird and then the Cookie Monster. And then I actually have a segment where I'm singing it with my dog howling in the background with different examples of common ways the students present APA format for them to kind of pick the one that's not correct. And you have 3 correct examples and 1 incorrect example. And then to span a larger number of generations, I have some examples with Jeopardy music. So that gives you a little taste of that. And these are some common responses that I received to this video. So notice in addition to whatever the students may or may not have picked up regarding APA format, I do actually know that the students that responded here did make some significant changes, but also just highlighting that the music evokes positive memories and helped, again, as a stress buster, which is always another purpose. Okay, here is a discussion post that I share in a couple of courses. I have kind of different intros for them, but I share this song in a couple of courses. In one course, when we get to the section where we talk about biases related to ageism, and in another, and in actually a couple other courses, we talk about neurocognitive disorders. And so I'll just play just a little bit of this. Actually put the lyrics up first so you can.
Please notice the change. And misplacing all her things. He'd make a joke, they both laugh, blame it on old age. But it's not funny anymore. She can't remember his name. But he believes way down deep she still knows who he is. 40 years of memories just can't disappear like this. The doctors say it's hopeless. Her past has been erased. But he'll He'll spend the rest of his life saving grace.
Okay, so, and in the handout, there'll be hyperlinks to this actual video. But I get a lot of positive response from the students on this. I'll share a couple examples here. This particular student, the video reminded her of her grandmother. And so in my response back to her, I reflected some of what she shared and how special and what a inspirational woman her grandmother must have been. Another student got the point in a different kind of way. She admits that sometimes she makes those kind of jokes that I talked about in the intro to the video that I wrote, and says, I will think twice next time before making those comments myself. For sake of time, we'll skip this one, but this is a video. Again, you'll have access to it in the handout that is very useful in any conversations related to parenting styles, child development, socialization. And then in another class, we have students reflect on their strengths and growth opportunities. And inevitably, I have a significant number of students that say procrastination is one of their growth areas. And so I have a variety of comics that I share related to procrastination. And then I share a couple of videos kind of side by side. So one is more of a mini lecture on procrastination and offers some tips to overcome procrastination. And then I include the humorous procrastination, the musical. We'll do just a little bit of this.
See, I have to write this essay that the teacher gave us week, and it's due tomorrow morning, 20 pages all in Greek. Now, but first I'll check my Tumblr, Facebook, Twitter, call my mom, then just one more page on iwastesommuchtime.com. I'm procrastinating, all day I sit here waiting for just the perfect moment to begin.
We're procrastinating. Why work? We could be gaming. Agree. Procrastination for the win.
Okay, so it makes the point in a different kind of way.
Only it's a fine. I'll have this one or two.
And here's an example of feedback or a reply that one of the students posted to me. So he found them entertaining. He really liked the comic strip. And then he writes this amazingly scholarly response to the rest of his post. Okay, now this is an example. Sometimes I do use humor offline with students, but I do have this little caution. If you use something like this in the way that I did, you really do need to know your students well. So I had a student in one class who was a little late on one of her assignments, and she went and read the late policy, and then she went into a full panic, according to her description. And she disclosed a lot of mental health challenges that she had also in the email. And so then I clarified the late policy for her. And so because she had made an interpretation error when she read the late policy. And then she came back with, oh my gosh, I'm so humiliated. And she went on kind of spiraling into some negative self-talk. And so, you know, I'm her instructor. I can't be her counselor. She did disclose she had one, so I affirmed her choice in that matter. And rather than telling her what to do, I offered what we call a third person interpretation. I said, you know, some people have found the lyrics to this particular song helpful when they're panicking. And I knew I could use this with this particular student because in her week 1 introduction, she talked about loving music because I share my interest in music. And she shared that the Temptations were one of her favorite groups. So I let her know, well, some people have found this useful to sing, you know, just the hook line to this song.
Just my imagination, running away with me. It was just my imagination, running away.
And so she came back with LOLs in the email after I shared this with her. She really loved it. And of course, she ended up doing fine in the course because she really was and is a very strong student. And 5 or 6 months later, you know, after she'd moved on to other courses, she sent me an email kind of out of the blue, just letting me know that she was still using that song to help her calm herself down in moments where she was at risk of panicking. So now let's address the elephant in the room when it comes to humor. Humor is not universal, so there is some risk involved, right, in using humor because it is highly contextual and cultural. And so as this particular author shares in Humor and the Quirky Nature of Online Teaching, that, you know, there are some risks involved. And so if you're not sure about the humor, it's probably best not to use it. Certainly there's no place for sarcasm. Some people think they're funny, but actually they're sarcastic, and sarcasm is really just veiled anger. But when used strategically, it actually does engage students and help learning. But it's not a panacea, so I don't use humor in every discussion post or necessarily in every week. I use, again, my box of crayons has lots of different colors and lots of different tools in my tool box. But humor I do use strategically in my course, and as well as music. But if you overuse it, then it certainly may trivialize at what we're trying to do here. Okay, so some of the guidelines. Does the humor or music have an educational purpose in terms of cognitive teaching or social presence? And will students get the message? You know, will they get the real message? And if you can say yes, or you think you could say yes, then go for it by all means. In the examples that I gave earlier, where I put some kind of humorous and musical elements in the announcements, I tend to leave those announcements open where students can comment on them, just to get a sense of how it is registering with students. And then occasionally, usually around the end of week 3, early week 4, when I know students are starting to get a little stressed and it's getting closer to the final project week, I'll just put something in the announcement that's just purely for laughs. So like this. And you see some of the typical kind of responses I get from students. Again, just little stress busters, no real deep educational purpose other than understanding that if you can reduce stress and anxiety, then the brains will be in a much better position to learn. Okay, so now I want to hear from you. What are your crayons? Has anybody worked on an acronym? And I'm trying to get where I can see the chat. It's not showing up. Do I need to be, okay, there it is. So I'll give a few moments and I'll kind of catch up on comments. I see Maureen adds perception tests in the introduction. Awesome. Thanks, Kelly, for sharing that. Videos and comics too. Well, if anybody wants to share their acronym, I shared a couple of options earlier, by all means do share. And we're getting close to wrapping up here. Let me check the time. Oh, we're about there, okay. So what I'll do for the video then is, just remind you that we're all different. No two of us are going to color our classes the same way, but the point is do something, bring some life, some energy, some smiles, some new information to your class in a way that's true to your own personality and also will help benefit our students. So thank you all for attending and or watching if you're watching later. And I'm just going to scroll through the references quickly so they'll be on the recording. But again, I'll also be sharing the link to the PDF of this presentation in the chat. Feel free to email me if you've got any ideas, questions, or just want to chat about humor, music, or other crayons that you use in your class. So thanks everyone, and I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to stop sharing so I can post the link in the chat.
And while Yolanda is posting the link to the chat, want to thank Dr. Yolanda Harper for her interactive and fun presentation, and for all of you joining this session today. So we hope you enjoy the rest of TLC today.
Thanks, everyone.